for everyone joining. Good morning. Thank you for joining. I'm Adrian Barnett. I've been working in financial crime risk now for the last 20 years in industry and Big Four consulting, and I lead the regulatory advisory practice here at BeyondFS. BeyondFS is a specialist financial crime risk consultancy that helps firms build financial crime programs that reduce risk, satisfy regulators, and restore confidence. Also, we hope. Thank you for joining today's webinar on business-wide risk assessments. Today's session is about one of those shifts we're all starting to feel, the move from static spreadsheet-based business-wide risk assessments to a digital data-driven platform. Most of us, for most of us, the BWRA cycle has become heavier, more complex, harder to evidence, and regulators are asking for more traceability and auditability, and boards want sharper insight, faster reporting, and yet too often the tools that we have aren't really evolved to handle that. So these are some of the areas that we're going to explore today. If you do have questions, please do put them in the chat throughout, and if we have time, we'll come to some of those. You will come away from this webinar with a better understanding of how a digital platform can support your BWRA efforts, whether it's digitalising the BWRA, whether that's the right solution for you, and if it is, how to bring it to life in your organisation. So what we're going to do is send around a quick self-assessment after today's session so that you can benchmark yourself against that. I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Anthony Quinn, who is the founder of Arctic Intelligence, a platform many of you may know for bringing structure, auditability, and efficiency to the BWRA process. Between us, we'll unpack what digitalisation practice, and not just the technology story behind the business case, but where firms are saving costs, where there's stronger engagement and far more responsive data flows. With that, let me just hand over to Anthony so he can introduce himself and the firm.
Thanks, Adrian, and to your team as well for inviting me on the webinar, and thanks a lot for everyone that's tuned in. So, as Adrian mentioned, I'm the founder and the CEO of Arctic Intelligence. We're a specialised RegTech firm that specialises in financial crime risk assessment technology. The business was founded in 2015. Prior to that, I'd probably spent 20 odd years consulting into various investment retail banks, originally from the UK, although I've been on a 22-year gap year in Australia, so I have developed a bit of a twang. But essentially, we focus on cloud-based technology. So we have two platforms. One's targeting small and medium-sized businesses in about 75 different countries. So we've got a tailored risk assessment to about 30 different industries and AML program documentation that's been tailored to 75 jurisdictions. And we also developed a fairly sophisticated risk assessment platform that allows organisations that are kind of larger, more complex enterprises that actually want to take a lot more control over their risk management process in terms of kind of configuring methodologies and risk models and things like that, a platform to do that. So I'm really delighted to kind of get stuck into this topic. So thanks, Adrian, again for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks, Anthony. Right, so we're going to kick off with a poll because we want to slide into what we're doing here. So the first poll, hopefully you'll all get the opportunity to select one of the options in the side there where you can go on to polls, is how would you describe your organization's current approach to the business-wide risk assessment? Some of you may call it an enterprise-wide risk assessment. Some of you might call it business-wide. Some of you might just call it a risk assessment. But hopefully BWRA is a term that most understand. So just give that 45 seconds for people to answer. Got a good number of people on the call, so hopefully we'll get some good data that comes in here. At the moment, we're looking at half or just over half are still entirely on spreadsheets. That's not unsurprising. And the rest of, I'd say, Yeah, we've got about 80 to 90% now are either spreadsheet based or partially digital with some automation or templates. Got a couple in there who don't currently conduct BWRA, so hopefully this webinar will be interesting for those individuals. Okay, and I think we'll round it out there. We are pretty much at bang on 90% for either entirely manual or partially digital. So let me just crack into you can continue answering that poll as we start this, but Anthony, let me start with a question to you. I just want to go over some of the things that we're going to talk about today around common challenges, costs and efficiency, automation, and that sort of traceability point. Let's start with common challenges though, because I think that's everyone in conducting BWRAs, in your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a big topic. We've only got half an hour. You can probably spend at least half an hour on this topic alone. But I mean, I guess the risk-based approach by definition is not prescriptive. So obviously the onus is on organisations to really design the risk assessment in a way that's both kind of appropriate and proportionate to the nature, size, complexity of their business. So every organisation is going to approach this in slightly different ways depending on the size or the sector or the countries that they're operating in. So we see kind of a real mixed bag. We've helped hundreds of clients across about 20 different industry sectors and 20 odd countries now. So we've seen a lot of approaches, including those from advisors that are advising those firms. But I think that there's probably a number of key or common challenges that we see. I guess the first one is really, how do organisations have a proper conversation with their boards? Obviously, boards are ultimately accountable for defining the risk appetite, setting the risk tolerance. And I think pretty much if you asked any board director, what's your tolerance or your risk appetite for having criminals laundering money through my bank? And they'd all say, we've got no appetite whatsoever. Well, that's just not possible. You have to shut all the products down, not have any customers and what have you. So you're definitely going to have some risk exposure, but it's really defining, what is that appetite? What's that tolerance? How do you define kind of what is an acceptable level of risk? And I'm not sure people do that at the beginning. They probably do that a lot reflectively when there's been a problem and people realize that there are kind of risks that are kind of unsurfaced. So I think that's kind of one, I guess, foundational building blocks. The other is really obviously around the methodology that people use. So deciding, well, what is the rating scale? Is it low, medium, high? Is it low, medium, high, very high? Do you have a 3-point scale, 4-point scale? How do you actually define the key attributes? How do you define likelihood? Is it on a quantitative metric, a qualitative metric? How do you define the impact? The same, right? And then really in terms of what kind of inherent risk indicator questions are you really asking yourselves across all of the main kind of risk groups and categories and factors and indicators? What are the things that are relevant to my business? Are you looking at decent coverage? Like, are you looking at internal and external threats, and are you looking at different types of customer risk or business operational risk, so like employee risk, outsourcing risk, other things that aren't in the usual, like 4 or 5 customer, product, channel, geography, etc. Really actually looking at it kind of more kind of comprehensively, and really just kind of looking at are people taking a subjective approach to this? So they're asking very qualitative, kind of subjective questions, or is it more kind of fact-based, objective, data-driven, quantitative, whatever you want to call it, or obviously a combination of the two? And then basically being able to understand, well, how do all of the different things, I guess the risk groups within a risk model, how do they all interact with each other? And like, do you do a channel risk assessment separately to a product risk assessment, separate to a business risk assessment? How do all of those components kind of feed up to each other, even within one, say, assessment unit? And that's not really even considering some of the complexities where, you know, a lot of organizations are operating across different geographies, different business units, you know, all those types of things. So
I'd completely agree with that. I think certainly when you come to the consolidation of all of those risks as well, you know, more often than not, I see firms doing separate risk assessments. So an ABC risk assessment, a fraud risk assessment, an AML and CTF risk assessment. And those are not done, or not necessarily done, for everyone at the same time. So there's this continuous loop throughout the year of a risk assessment pointed at a particular thing, which can be quite siloed. So then I've often found that the reporting side of it becomes really onerous. And you know, also from an engagement point of view as well, if you're continually at your first line or into the business asking them questions about financial crime controls and what their risks are, they get jaded pretty quickly. And I think, just reflecting on another thing which you said there, which is around the inherent risk questionnaire as well, is that I've seen both things. I've seen it from the perspective of it being purely qualitative and non-data driven at all, which I think, you know, gets you to a point of validating what it is that you think the business is doing without actually really having proper challenge. And the other side to that is you get a team that comes together and generates an inherent risk questionnaire, which is, you know, Deutsche Gersky would be proud of the size of the inherent risk questionnaire.
I was gonna say, like, you know, like, you know, the data-driven approach is obviously sound. If you have the data and it's reliable, it's clean, it's accurate, you can actually access it, you know, in a repeatable way. And that is often where, you know, some of the challenges come with trying to do a pure data-driven approach. But I think, you know, we've seen a lot of organizations that do a risk assessment, but they really stop without actually assessing any controls. So like to me, that's not really worth even doing, because, you know, like, so what if you understand what your inherent risks are? You know, that's only going to tell you so much. You know, what controls do you have in place? You know, are they designed effectively? Are they operating effectively? How do you actually test the design and operational effectiveness, you know, through sampling, or, you know, how do you actually draw some solid conclusions that the actual control framework that you've got in place is actually mitigating the risks that you've identified? You know, like, just stopping at that inherent risk doesn't seem to, but there are still a lot of organizations that do.
And that's hard. Sorry to interrupt. That's hard as well, because you know, the sort of financial crime compliance framework is, you know, because it's just one part of compliance that an institution has to think about, and when you get underneath that, it sort of broadens out fairly quickly. So trying to get someone to validate or assure all of those controls in any one 12-month period is just not really feasible. So it's going to have to be a combination of, you know, self-assessment versus you know, objective monitoring or assurance type of assessment.
I kind of have a sort of a slightly different view on that. Is that I think that, you know, and this probably talks to the point of, you know, most of the audience, 90% or whatever it was, using Excel spreadsheets, that, like, because it's quite cumbersome, especially when you're in a large organization, you know, you've got 20, 30, 40 or more business units, you know, like, you're rolling out spreadsheets to multiple stakeholders, you're collecting them back in, there's errors in them, you know, like, you're trying to assimilate and aggregate the data across multiple sheets, trying to build, you know, dashboard reports, or, you know, Word report summaries and things like that. Just, you know, the observation is that people are doing risk assessments far less frequently than they actually should or could, if that process was more streamlined. So essentially, they're spending more time administering the risk assessment process than managing the actual risks.
Yeah.
And I think there is a bit of kind of a mindset in some organizations where it's like, hey, it's that time of year again, we better dust off our BWRA and just do that, on an annualized basis, as opposed to, this is a real, the risk assessment is a pretty fundamental control, because if you don't understand what your risks are, how you don't understand what controls you need, and if so you're kind of like building, this whole house on like shaky foundations, really, if you don't
and
do
I think
that
it's
right.
I think it's important to reflect that we've just seen, from a UK perspective, we've just seen the FCA release their view on corporate finance firms, that risk assessments there are just not being done adequately. There's again, the FCA did some desktop-based work and also some visits in 23, 24, and they found that only 26% of firms had either a compliant or partially compliant risk assessment process in place. I think it's quite clear that firms are either struggling with it, or are not doing it to the expectation which the regulator has, and I think that's really, really tough. I think I'm just going to move on a little bit to
Sure.
some of the other stuff that you said around sort of efficiency. So sort of coming into that cost and efficiency piece, many firms, and this is what you're saying about, you get to brush off the BWRA once a year, but many firms have invested a huge amount of time and resource into the spreadsheet-based BWRA. It is seen as good enough. It does the job, and I think in many cases that can be true. But what does the cost benefit equation look like, or really look like, when moving to a digital platform? Are we talking about genuine efficiency gains, or are we just talking about a more elegant user experience?
I'm obviously biased, but I think, I would kind of like question the, a spreadsheet is good enough. Like, I
Ooh,
mean,
I think we may have.
there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think we just lost you a
Yes.
little bit there.
Sorry. Yeah. So I think I was just saying that I would actually challenge the, the premise that Excel-based models are good enough. There's a ton of limitations in Excel-based models. Good as Excel is, you can't really get any field level audit trail information. You can't have any. There's no kind of like workflow. There's no way of uploading documents or evidence, or assigning risks or controls for assessment to certain individuals, and having any kind of review or approval capability in Excel. We've seen a lot of Excel-based models that have been used as the foundation for a risk assessment presented to the board, only to discover that there's Excel broken formulas in there. They're pretty hard to explain. So I would kind of question whether Excel is good enough. I think the majority of the people that we talk to, including very large banks right to very small banks, I would say that Excel is the de facto standard right now. But I think there's a lot of things that people can do, and a lot of gains that they can make just simply by digitizing that Excel based approach. So that's what we spend a lot of time with our clients, that that they have got Excel models, and there's nothing wrong with the actual content of the model in terms of the level of questions. Although often when we are talking around digitization, some organizations just say, I'm just trying to digitize exactly what I've been using, and then you actually start looking at the depth and breadth of the content that they actually have, and the lack of coverage that they have in a number of different risk areas, and often then they're quite rudimentary in terms of very basic level of risks that are applied. Even some of the advisory firms that we've seen, where they might have 5 questions that they ask around every single product, and obviously every single product is the characteristics and features of those products from a vulnerability point of view, from an organized crime exploitation, completely different. So just having a very vanilla kind of way of going about it,
Yeah.
which obviously is what a lot of people are doing. I think that that can be improved a lot through the use of technology, and I think you know, just in terms of that digitization process, if you like, you know, you can tailor the methodology to any risk management framework. You can build risk models that have got, you know, multiple levels of hierarchy. You can have pretty sophisticated levels of weighting and proportionality. Like that's a lot of one of the simplicity things in a lot of Excel models. Often they're treating things completely equally. All risks are treated equally, or you know, even though right the way down
I think
to.
one of the things to try and cover, I don't know, how have you helped your clients with convince the board or the CFO that this isn't just another, you know, faddy tech purchase, but this is actually a genuine cost saver or saver in efficiency to the BWRA cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's around, you know, demonstrating strategic value of the platform. Often we find it quite easy to convince the kind of the MLROs and the risk and compliance teams, because they're the ones at the coalface really managing an Excel-based process, and they know the issues and the time spent and the problems that they have administering these processes every year. So actually showing them and also proving to them. So we often do POCs with customers, you know, so they actually can show how their Excel-based risk model can be digitized and displayed in the platform, you know, with their content, with their controls, you know, aligned to their organizational structure, so they can see, you know, how the information can aggregate up to their kind of MLROs or their chief risk officer or their board. So I think a lot of it is kind of like, you know, showing, not telling. You know, like actually seeing is believing. I think that's kind of the key thing. But you know, they then have a challenge to actually convince their stakeholders. You know, particularly where you know, there may have been the investment in sort of generic GRC type platforms already, which most organisations have. The problem with those systems is that they're generally not designed for financial crime risk assessment use cases, so they're not capable of doing the same sort of things that our solution does. So I think it goes back to the strategic value. It talking about, like, you know, it's not just about making the process more user friendly. It's around transforming the way in which risk management, financial crime risk management, is actually executed. You know, it's talking about if you can join the dots between the information that you have, and you can justify, you know, where you have controls that are weak, you know, where they're deficient, you can do comparative benchmarking from one country to another, one business unit to another, one product line to another. You really get a lot of visibility around where those gaps actually are.
And I think
and
that's
then,
sorry, I think it's absolutely important, because one of the things that I've seen is that, you know, trying to get the data together to be able to make those comparisons across country or across business units is just painful. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to, you know, pivot the spreadsheet in order to be able to give you that data and whether it's reliable or not. I'm just going to change us slightly into the automation side of things. So we're all sort of long enough in the tooth now with financial crime compliance technology to know that there's nothing comes off the shelf and plugs in and just works. So I think, you know, look, the nirvana is automation. Yeah, to be data driven, to get it real time. Um, what are some of the barriers that you've seen organizations have in achieving this?
I think most often that it goes back to that point before. It's like Excel is good enough. What we're doing is good enough. Let's just tick the box. So it's actually having the will to do it. That's kind of one barrier. I think the next barrier is really around kind of an aspiration and a capability disconnect. I think I've lost you, Adrian.
Sorry, can you? I think you may have just dropped me there. Sorry.
Yeah, I was wondering whether it was you or me that dropped out. I just didn't want to carry
Sorry,
on
everyone.
talking. If, no problem. Yeah, I was just saying, the will to do it is one thing. I think that the other thing is that there's definitely a capability versus an aspiration gap. Often when you talk to MLROs, they say, I want a real-time data-driven risk assessment that's all fully automated, that I could just click a button and it all just works. I think, from our point of view, that's kind of music to our ears, because that's actually our aspiration for our business and for our product. In actual fact, we can do a data-driven risk assessment by taking in API data to actually push data into a data set, and also then into an assessment unit framework. So the actual technology exists. So I don't think it's really that is particularly the barrier. But actually, when you start breaking that problem down, you start saying, well, what risk indicators do you want to to capture, from a data-driven quantitative perspective? Do you know where that data is sitting within your organization? Is it all sitting in one place in a FinCrime data store, ready to be, the source of truth for, driving those risk indicators? Is it clean and reliable and accurate? So it often goes into kind of, data quality, data transformation, really. So
Yeah.
I think,
And I think that's
the aspiration, I think, for a lot of people is there, and we just say, crawl, walk, run, sprint. You'll get a lot of value out of digitizing from Excel into a platform in the first instance. If you do nothing else, you'll get a lot of value out of that.
Yeah.
And then as you mature, and as the system, as you, I guess, have the end in mind, and you can actually take steps, systematically and business process technology wise, to kind of get to that aspiration. Then I think that's the key to it, really.
Yeah, and I completely agree, because I see this with a number of firms as well. Is that identification of where the data is, understanding what it is that you actually want to bring through into the platform, and finding it in your sort of data architecture, and then taking good, positive but slow steps to understand what your design looks like, get your design principles worked out, and then work out where the data is, so that when it comes to implementing of technology or a platform, that actually you've done a lot of the hard work or the heavy lift around what it is you're going to
Yeah.
achieve. And
And then,
go on.
yeah, I was going to say I agree with that. The other kind of like complication in that whole discussion is, so you've got the data, one data point of a whole business risk assessment might be, how many customers do you have that are foreign PEPs or whatever. So you get a number, or you get a percentage, or kind of, so what does that actually translate to? Like, how do I actually calibrate to say, okay, if the data that I have got falls between this range and this range, this should be considered to be low, medium, or high. Like, how does it actually tie back to the methodology that you actually have? And how do you make those kind of arbitrary, decisions, basically? So you can get the data. Even if you can get the data, you can feed it into the system. We can do, I can do a demo for anyone that wants to see that. But I think there's more fundamental issues around, like how you treat that data, what the thresholds are, what does that actually mean from a risk management point of view. But it's very good, because it sort of triggers a lot of the discussion that needs to be had, really.
Yeah, agree. And I think that we one of the benefits I see is lining up the control library against the sort of in the platform, so that you have a clear, traceable understanding of what your risk is that you're trying to tackle, against what the controls are that you have in place. I'm very conscious that we're at time, Anthony. I think you're absolutely right. There is so much content here that we could basically chat for most of the day. What we have had a number of questions that come through the chat here. And I've got some other questions that have come through. So we can do a bit of a round robin on cleaning up some of those questions. But what I would like to do is, Anthony, thank you so much for the time that we spent today. Thank you for the insights. And thanks everyone for joining. I think it's been a really valuable discussion. I think maybe next time we schedule in 45 minutes or so, Anthony, just to make sure we get there.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely more topics that we can unpack if there's interest from the group.
Absolutely.
Anything that we want to unpack, we could spend half an hour on each of those topics probably.
Indeed. So if there's anything you feel we've not covered or that you'd like to hear more about, please just send me an email either through the BeyondFS website or directly through LinkedIn. Definitely follow each of us on LinkedIn, and it's clear to us that this is no longer a compliance exercise. It is a risk management exercise to make sure that it's becoming living data-driven view of a firm's financial crime risk. But thank you very much for everyone, and we will speak to you again at some point in the future. Thanks very much. Bye bye.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Adrian.